Hi, I welcome you to today's episode of my book reflections on the channel from Dr. Myles Munroe. We are on the third book of reflection, The Principles and Benefits of Change. And in the previous episode, we looked at chapter 1, which discussed the theme, Everything Changes. And we came to understand the important implication of we accepting or embracing the idea that everything changes, because it helps us to walk through this life with the various changing scenes that we meet, the various transitions that we meet, the various changes that happen to us personally, around us, with others, and all that we were able to pick from the previous lesson. Today we are looking at chapter 2, which is on the theme reacting to change, and it will help us to see how some people or most people react to change rather than respond to change. So we would understand what it means to react to change and some of the ways that we are often pushed to react to change, and we'll see what that can help us to know as we proceed in the book to understand the benefits and principles of change. Welcome once again, and I hope you find today's lesson useful. Okay. So, yes, once again, the book chapter for today is chapter 2, and it is on the theme reacting to change. And the sub-theme is our natural tendency, acting before thinking. Our natural tendency, acting before thinking. And it begins with a key quote from General Eric Shimseki, a former U.S. Army Chief of Staff. And he says that if you don't like change, you are going to like irrelevance even less. If you don't like change, you are going to like irrelevance even less. And this is simply because without change, things will not be transformed, we will not move forward, and things will not, as it were, get better. So without having this appreciation and understanding that change is essential for our living as humans in this world, you would realize that a lot of things will become irrelevant, a lot of things will become mediocre, a lot of things would not be as we would expect it to be. So all the transformation that we see around us, which are as a result of change in technology, in education, in various aspects of life, they will not be able to happen if change is not part of our human existence. And so what you would see, because change is not happening, would even be something that you would not like even more. So the key in this chapter is that for us to be able to understand change and be able to use change for or to our advantage, we must know how to plan for and use change for our benefit. So how to plan for and use the change for our benefit. That is important, having understood from the previous chapter that change is inevitable. No matter what we do, change will happen to us, change will happen within us, change will happen because we initiate change, and all that we discussed. And the first part we want to look at is reacting to change versus responding to change. And Dr. Myles helps us to understand what he means by reacting to change. So in this sense, I am defining reaction as having a negative attitude towards change, or taking an action against change before really thinking about its consequences. So when he refers to reacting to change, what he's saying is that our tendency to have a negative attitude, a negative mindset, a negative orientation towards change, or we taking steps, taking actions against change, against any form of change, before we really think about that change and our actions, as well as the consequences of our actions. And this is a very dangerous way of dealing with change, because in reacting to change, as in this sense of having a negative attitude towards change or taking actions before thinking about them when it comes to change, what we are doing is that we are putting ourselves in a place of vulnerability, in a place where we become a victim of change. And he says that it usually results in fear, miscalculation, overcompensation, premature activity, irresponsible or unnecessary use of resources, and even disaster. And that is because we are not able to plan and use change for our benefit. So merely reacting to change gives change an advantage over you, rendering you a victim of your circumstances. And as someone who works within the mental health fraternity, you would understand that a lot of issues that people have when it comes to especially anxiety is because of how they interpret situations that go on around them. People going through emotion-related challenges, people depressed, people having serious issues with grief and all. The attitude towards the change, the significant changes happening to them, the mind and how they are interpreting or evaluating the situation becomes the power that holds them down. And so in most instances, having a way to help them overcome the attitude, the negative attitude, the negative perspective they have in interpreting what is happening helps them to gradually get out of that emotional state of depression, anxiety, and all. So the first way for us to be able to understand change and how our activity towards change, whether we are reacting or responding, is for us to understand the difference between reacting and responding to change. And we therefore move to ways that people react to change. The whole component of responding to change would understand that in the chapter 3, which will be our next episode. So today we are focusing on reacting to change. And there are some 5 key ways that we discussed in the previous episode as how change happens to us and how people would usually respond. Number 1, we mentioned that people watch things happen. Number 2, people let change happen. Number 3, people ask what's happened. Number 4, people defy what happens. And number 5, some people make change happen. And we discussed this in depth in the previous episode, which I have linked in the cards above. Now, the first 4, which is watching change to happen, letting change to happen, asking what happened, and defying what happens, are all reactions to change. And as we define reacting to change, these are negative attitudes towards change. Because there's one person who really does not know what is happening and is asking what happened. There's one person who just allows change to happen because they don't really know how they can participate in the change that is happening. And there are those that are watching on as other people are making change happen. And then there are others that defy what happens. They fail to accept the change that is happening. They try to resist the change that is happening. The 5th one is what actually is about responding to change, a component of it which is making change to happen. And so there are some ways that people react to change, and we'll look at them in the chapter. Number 1 is that you can ignore or deny change. So when change happens, unexpected or unwanted change happens, there is this tendency, natural tendency for us to ignore or deny change. And in the realms of psychology, this is one of the reactions that we classify under defense mechanisms. And defense mechanisms are unconscious strategies that our mind uses to help us to deal with distressing events, distressing situations, or distressing information. And so denial, being in a state of denial, is one of the ways that naturally we have a tendency to respond to unexpected or unwanted change. And many people would want to ignore change because it helps them in the moment to survive. And ignoring or denying change is in the moment able to help you cope or manage the situation. Because as we'll see, if you don't pay attention to something, it may not hurt you. But in the long term, in the medium to long term, you'd realize that this way of reacting to change by ignoring it or denying it can become your source of distress going forward. So when change threatens our comfort and security, we are tempted to retreat into a world of denial. So somebody who loses a loved one, in the instance of hearing the information or news or having knowledge of that loss, the first response in most instances is that this cannot be happening. It is not true. So in denying the change, the new situation that is at play, which is a loss to them, they in the moment, and what we call our ego, a part of our mind in the discussions of psychoanalysis and all, is that the ego is able to help protect us from the intense shock and distress that comes with that negative information. So ignoring by denying the presence of change is one of the ways that people would usually deal with change when it happens, unexpected or unwanted change. And that leads to unproductive and very destructive behaviors going forward after the reality begins to dawn on the people. So pretending that change isn't happening has no effect on change. It usually makes you a victim of it. So the person is in denial over time, trying to pretend that they have not lost the job, they have not lost the relationship, that things are not going bad. They are in denial. They are ignoring all the change that is happening around them, within them, and all the things that are going on. They are in a state of pretense. And that does not change or stop the change from happening. The change will happen nonetheless. The transformation will happen nonetheless. The distraction will happen nonetheless. Except for you to only realize at some point later that being in denial or pretending that change was not happening actually made you more of a victim rather than a victim. And there's an important, two important statements here, which I find really interesting. That change is always the introduction of the future to the present. So anytime there's a change within you, a change around you, a change that you are initiating, whichever form of change that it is a way of bringing the future to meet your present. So in change, whether negative or positive, it is giving us an idea of what is going to need to change with us, about us going forward. And so it is bringing the future and introducing it to our present, so that if we can take the right attitude towards the change, our future will be preserved. And number two, that change is tomorrow taking over today. And a denial of that change is a decision to live in yesterday. Because if you are not able to take advantage of the change that is happening, which is introducing your future to your present, what happens is that you may be living in your past. And this is where many people would say live in the past with their past glories, because they do not appreciate that things are changing. So whether it's in the sporting environment, you realize that there are some football clubs that still rely on their past glories. They've forgotten that in the present moment, things are changing. The dynamics of footballing are changing. The ways of keeping the goal, playing the ball, and all that is changing. Different tactics are coming. So if you are not able to embrace change that is happening, you'll become obsolete. You'll be living in your past. So eventually, it says to deny change is to become irrelevant. So reacting to change by denying change is one of the most dangerous ways of dealing with change. Number two, you can become angry at change. So the second way people would react to change is becoming angry at change. And this is also a typical way that naturally we are pushed to respond to change, especially when change is negative, it is unwanted, and it is something that will affect us significantly in the negative. Somebody, losing a job, somebody losing a marriage, somebody failing an exam, something happening, somebody losing a loved one, things that happen to us that makes us wonder, especially if you're a spiritual minded person, sometimes begin to question God, sometimes begin to question why some things would happen to us. And so in our nature of reacting to change by becoming angry, we end up, sometimes getting into self-destructive behaviors. And it can be a very serious detriment to us. So many people become angry because change comes without their permission, and it's not something they want or feel able to deal with. So in the realms of, going back to what I mentioned earlier, our defense mechanisms, one of the things that happens is that the people begin to act out. They begin to put up certain actions of anger that, ordinarily they wouldn't have been able to. So they act out in ways that are more extreme than even the situation at hand would demand as a response or reaction. So acting out, and in some cases they even displace. So another defense mechanism called displacement. So because they cannot really have anything to do about the change, it is more of an issue that they have no control over. The anger that boils up within them because of that significant change is reflected or displaced onto other people. It could be their children, it could be their spouse, it could be their teachers, the students. So at the end of the day, other people who are not the cause of the change become the recipient of your anger. So yet being angry at inevitable change is like being angry at winter for coming. As we've mentioned previously in the first chapter, change is inevitable. Whether for the positive or negative, change will happen no matter what. And so if we become angry at change and we are not able to manage this natural emotion of anger, we'll end up self-destructing and also distracting others. And among other negative outcomes, being angry leads to some, issues, and 5 of them are listed in here for our consideration. Number 1, develop internal stress. And one thing about our human tendency to respond to threats is that our body has a natural stress response. So any information within us or externally, any situation that seems to pose a danger to us or a threat to us, our brain communicates this, a threat to other parts of the body, and it responds. So there's an emotion regulation center within our brain called our amygdala, and our amygdala will sense danger whether it is information you've heard, whether you see something that is, so terrible and all that, send the stress signal, and a lot of, other mechanisms will set in. Stress hormones released, and your body is heightened up. And that is where the anxiety comes in. That is where the emotion that builds up for fighting, comes in. And that is part of our body's natural way of responding to stress. And this leads to a lot of stress hormones released in your body. Your system is filled up with a lot of, stress chemicals, and subsequently it can cause you to become physically ill, develop medical conditions that are as a result of stress. And so when change is happening around us, we hear information at the workplace, things are readjusted, you are laid off and all that. And all of these things, we are not able to manage the anger that comes with it. We will develop a lot of complications, medical complications, psychological complications that can be detrimental to us. The second thing is that we become bitter. So we are eaten up by the change that is unwanted, the change that is unexpected. And you, as I mentioned, may begin to displace that bitterness onto other people. And number three, we turn on the very people that we love, which is as a result of this bitterness that has become a part of us due to the change that we are reacting to with anger. Number four, we accuse people who are not even responsible for our change and the things happening around and within us. And finally, we develop self-destructive habits. Some people at the end of the day will resort to smoking, will resort to drinking, because in a way, drinking alcohol, for instance, has a way of ensuring some calm within the system, because it activates certain brain related chemicals, some neurotransmitters, one that we call GABA, for instance, which helps to stop the firing of a lot of nerve information in the brain. So it helps to calm us down. And other mechanisms within our system are activated, and it ensures this calming effect that we get. And so people will end up in some of these self-destructive practices that in the short term will help them to calm down, would help them to distract themselves away from what is happening, but in the medium to long term will become the source of their distraction. So these are just some negative outcomes of reacting to change through anger. And number three, we can also defy or resist the change, which is one thing that is natural to us as people. When things go against our wish, when our plans become distorted, things happen and it changes the course of our lives. One of the ways that many would deal with the change is by defying it or resisting the change. This is different from the first thing we talked about, which is denying the change or pretending as though it is not present. In this case, you are resisting the change, and it is one of our stress responses. When we feel threatened, one of the stress responses is to fight. So the fight mode is activated. We want to resist the change because it is negative. And he says here that I'm not talking about responding to problems that can be addressed, such as cleaning up corruption and bringing justice to those who are being taken advantage of. I'm referring specifically to change that you cannot, for all practical purposes, do anything about. So for example, maybe your company goes completely out of business and you lose your job, or perhaps your spouse divorces you and marries someone else. So in instances where there is practically nothing you can do about the situation, somebody you love is dead, there's really practically nothing you can do about the situation, except a miracle happens and God is able to bring this person back to life. They are dead. They are gone. There's nothing that you can do about it. And in such situations, the person may be in denial, as we mentioned early on, or may resist the fact that this is happening. So the fact that we are failing to admit and accept that change is happening, by resisting the change can be a source of distress to us, and we lose out on opportunities to do new things. So this goes beyond being angry or turning on yourself and others. It means that you decide you will defy the reality of the circumstance, situations, or events that are impacting your present state. So you can actually say to yourself about such change, this will not happen. You can resolve in your heart that you will die holding on to your previous status or situation, whether or not it truly exists any longer. So someone who was rich, was wealthy, enjoying all that life could present to him, and this person goes bankrupt, and they fail to accept that a certain change significant has happened, and therefore they need to begin to live a life as somebody who is no longer rich, who is no longer wealthy. That change and their ability to know that this change has happened, accept it, and make the necessary adjustments to their life that will help them to either bounce back or be able to live a fulfilling life, they are not able to, because they can't bring themselves to the fact that this change is actually happening. The circumstance, the situation, the events that are causing them distress in the moment, they are not able to realize that it is because a significant change has happened. They reject the change. So, and in some instances, another defense mechanism that comes into play is that they try to rationalize. They try to do the blame game. They try to, we try to, more or less associate it with somebody else, something else, without accepting that this is something that is actually happening to us, and probably we are the ones that caused what happened. And so this statement, the tragic thing is that they end up sacrificing the rest of their lives to their lost past, which is something that we just explored. They lose out on opportunities to enjoy the relationships that they still have, to meet new friends, to expand their knowledge, and to explore the uncharted territories of their true potential, all for the sake of trying to protect the way of life they used to have, the way life used to be. If you try to resist inevitable change, you will not win, because change will always win. The fourth way that people react to change is that they accept the change. And this looks like a positive thing, because accepting change is the beginning of knowing how to make the right adjustments and move on. But accepting change alone is not enough. So if the way of dealing with change is to accept it, then it literally means that you make yourself vulnerable. So there are some people that they just accept that, yes, things are changing, something has happened, I've lost the job, I've lost my spouse, I've lost my child, I've lost the opportunity. Well, that's it. Yes, it's true, it has happened. And then they do nothing. So to accept change means that you have acknowledged change is coming or is already happening. Even though this acknowledgement is good, it's still only the first step to responding effectively to change. So an example is given that you find yourself standing on a train track, and then you say to yourself, as a train is coming towards you on top speed, and you say to yourself, that train is moving toward me, and I accept the fact that it is traveling at a high speed, and I accept the fact that I cannot stop it and that it will hit me. And this, in the realm of psychology, is something that we refer to as learned helplessness. Some people get to a point where they learn to be helpless. And you may want to read about learned helplessness, the phenomenon of learned helplessness subsequently. And the idea is that the person accepts that I am in a place of vulnerability. I'm in a place of disadvantage, and there's nothing I can do about it. So yes, they have accepted that change is happening or change is about to happen, but they do not know how to deal with the change so that it will be an advantage to them rather than a disadvantage to them. So if you stop at the acceptance of change, it says you will not reap any real benefit. Your acceptance will end up as another form of reaction rather than as a true response to change. It won't transform your life in any positive way. So as we move to chapter 3 and we look at how to respond to change, you would realize that in responding to change, the first step is to accept that change is happening. And in chapter 1, we examine that change is inevitable and you must embrace that inevitability. So that is one way that people react to change, by accepting the change. But it is not enough, because accepting alone can make you a victim if nothing more is done. And then the fifth one is that some people react to change by adjusting to it or accommodating it. And this is similar to you accepting change without necessarily taking the steps that will make change an advantage. So adjusting to or accommodating inevitable change means you are aware that if you don't do something, the change will have a permanent impact on you, and it may be one that is detrimental to you. So therefore, you begin to make a few changes in your life that will make you adapt to the change. So if I have lost a loved one, I have lost a job, I have lost something, or that I need to move from where I stay to a different place without necessarily being something that I had planned. Necessity, experiences, things have caused me to push myself out of that area or that environment. In such cases, you make some adjustments that will help you to adapt to your new environment or your new situation. Now, this approach helps because making adjustments is part of your ability to deal with change. However, it does not result in your really benefiting from the change because you are simply accommodating the change. So you move into a new environment and there's somebody that is always causing trouble, and all that you do is to adjust yourself so that you can come home, you enter your room, you are fine, you don't have any thing to do with the person that is causing the trouble, or you live in a neighborhood where you realize that when it rained, the place gets flooded, and what you do is to find a way that you can enter your room without necessarily suffering from what the others are suffering. You have made an adjustment to the change that is happening so that you can live your life. But you know what? Time will come where that adjustment will not be enough to save you. So in effect, you did not actively use that change for your advantage. You just accommodated the change. So even if you accept and adjust to change, you can still end up being its victim because you are not at the point of truly interacting with the change. And there are instances where some people find themselves being bullied, for instance, and what they do is to avoid the change, the change in moving from a place where they are not bullied to a place where others are bullying them verbally, non-verbally, and all that. So they try to avoid it, avoid the person as much as possible. But that cannot and may not be sustainable until that point where you begin to confront the change. You confront the person in assertive ways. And so without that interaction with the change, the bullying behavior may not stop. You may try to avoid it, you may try to accommodate it and adjust to it, but there is a point where you need to confront that bullying behavior. And so adjusting or accommodating to change may not be very sustainable. You need at some point to respond to the change. And all of these end us up becoming a victim to change. Whether we are denying the change, whether we are responding with anger, whether we are accepting the change, or whether we are just accommodating or adjusting to the change, all that leads us to becoming a victim of change. So any of the above approaches to change can result in someone allowing himself or herself to become a victim of change. Being a victim of change means that your reaction to it leaves you as a mere statistic. If you don't interact with the change, you become a byproduct of its effects. And an example is given of how you may become a victim of change if you react in all the following ways that we have discussed. So suppose you had worked in a factory for 25 years starting in 1965. When you began working there, they had no computers. You counted the products in the warehouse by hand and you wrote them down on a piece of paper. Then you started using a calculator because calculators, were invented and they became popular. But you still had to put the numbers in a ledger. In the meantime, you gained a degree of seniority in the company. Yet now, when you are 25 years into the job, change happens. And the head office says that we are going to computerize the warehouse. Everything needs to be done using the computers. And everybody must learn to use a computer. Here you are, 48 years old. You've never used a computer before. You don't even understand how the dynamics of computers work. But you want to keep your job. Change is happening. Significant change is happening within that company. And you need to respond to the change. But you've never used a computer, you don't understand how it is used, you love this company and you appreciate the way they've been good to you and your family over the years. You have goodwill, but you don't know what to do. So what do? You could react in any of the ways that we've discussed. You can try to ignore the change, be in a state of denial, and say that I'm not interested in learning the computer, I'm too old to learn it, I don't want to go back to school to prepare for another field, I'll just go along doing my job as always. I will pretend as though nothing is happening and I'll just do what I have always done. The company is moving, they need to stay competitive and the world of computer is taking over. If you are denying the change that is happening or you are ignoring it, it won't affect the fact that change is happening. And the company may, at the end of the day, bring you back to reality and tell you that you either learn it or we lay you off. You could also become angry about the situation and say that, you know what, this is how we've been doing it over time and it's been effective and I've had all the experience in this company and blah, 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 and all the things that you say, and you lash out at everybody, you displace back home on your children and all that. But at the end of the day, you either learn it or you lose your job. You can also resist the change. You refuse to learn. I refuse to learn the computer. I don't care what you people say. Again, you will be let go. And now you could accept the fact that the company needs to improve. You are aware that, technology is taking over and we can't go the paper way. We need to go in the computer format. Yes, we need to have a better way of keeping track of the numbers. But although I accept the fact that we need a computer upgrade, I'm still not willing to learn it. This is somebody who has become helpless in the situation. They feel that I cannot learn it because I am too old. As we say, I am born before computer. And so this person accepts that change needs to happen, but is not willing to be part of the change because they feel they cannot change. And all of these ways of responding to that particular change that is happening in the company will make you a victim of change, because at the end of the day, somebody who has been able to adjust themselves by learning while in the same company may be moved into your position and you lose your job. Or somebody from outside will now be employed who is a computer literate to come in and take over your job. You have become a victim of the change that is happening rather than a victim of the change. If you are not able to take advantage of the change that is happening by learning, so that you can now become on top of your game in the new era of computer usage. You will not be able to make progress. So there's a lot that is happening, and victims of change therefore have been swallowed up by the tsunami of transition. It says the undercurrent pulls their lives out to sea and then batters them against the rocks of reality. And as we've mentioned, in the short term, ignoring or denying, resisting may help you to cope and manage yourself. But before you realize, reality will dawn on you, and you realize that you have been swallowed up. So your hopes, aspirations, and dreams are left gasping for breath on the shores of humanity, because the world is changing. Things are changing at a rapid pace. The world of technology, every day there's a new release, a new version, a new iOS version, a new this and that. Things are changing. And if you are not able to respond to change rather than react to change, you will find yourself swallowed up by change. If you react, change leads your life. If you respond, you lead change in your life. And then the final statement, the final paragraph says, the only defense against the negative impact of change is the anticipation of and preparation for its inevitability. The ability to respond rather than react puts you in control and reduces change to servanthood. Responding to change gives you the ability to use change for your benefit. And in the next episode, chapter 3 of the book, we'll be reflecting on some of the key ways that we can respond to change rather than react to change. Thank you so much for joining today's episode, and I am grateful and hopeful that all the things that we've discussed, you'll be able to reflect on them as you go about your daily activities. And as we meet for the next episode, we'll continue to learn and be able to respond to change rather than react to change. Thank you, and as always, stay positive and always be a blessing. Bye-bye.